the podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. A warm welcome to all our listeners, and yes, especially to everyone here who follows us as listeners, who enjoys tuning in, and who joins us for our podcast, Value Impulses, which is meant to reach and appeal to all kinds of people, and also covers a wide range of topics. The topic of values is always at the heart of it. And today I have an exciting guest with me, someone I've known for ages. Luckily, personal relationships that last a long time are something truly enriching in life. And I'd like to give a very warm welcome, all the way from the originally French-speaking part of Switzerland, to Andy Marko. Hello, dear Andy.
Dear Uli, hello. I'm glad you invited me here. Thanks for the opportunity. And I'm also looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and the conversation is going to be exciting. I can already tell. We've already done quite a bit together. Among other things, we once flew to Dubai to get certified in profiling values. And we've also worked very, very closely together on many projects. You've always been someone, and I say this honestly, who is just fantastic to work with. You've really got something special from all sorts of perspectives. But it's not just about competence, it's also about the human side of things. And that's where Andy really shines. Now, for our listeners, just quickly, here's a kind of outline, thumbnail, snippets. What do we have planned for our conversation today? We're going to keep it to 30, maybe 40 minutes max, you already know that, too. At the beginning, we want to get to know him a bit, so the thread passes over to Andy. I'll share a few things I know about him. I'm also curious to hear what he'll say in a moment, but then we'll move on to the main topics. And that's really important to me. Andy has spent most of his professional life in the corporate world. I think I can say at this point, in the packaging industry, and he's truly a real pro. And I'm interested, what was that like, and so on. What did you learn from it? And then the next snippet, the next point is, at some point, you decided, no, I want out. I want to do things differently, I want to be self-employed. And I think that's really exciting, that's also how we met. Very soon after that, and of course you're still doing it today, but there's also this other side. And that's the last part of the snippet, hey, give. Back to society. Everything I was able to do, everything I was able to learn in life, how can I give it back, maybe in all sorts of different ways? And that's exactly what we want to talk about today. So, let's get started. In front of me, dear Andy, I also have your latest, well, how should I put it, your slide that describes your business. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce you a bit to our listeners. So, I mentioned the packaging industry, I mentioned you're self-employed, but what actually came before that? Where are you from? And what brought you to where you are now? Come on, go ahead.
I'd be happy to do that. So, Andy is a guy who didn't really want to study much, so I didn't. When I was about 16, I started an apprenticeship. And I worked in a print shop that was a trade that doesn't exist anymore today, namely typesetting, lead type, typesetting. I worked with the old Gutenberg.
The old Bible.
I didn't have it. I wasn't prepared. But the technology that existed in the 1970s, that's actually the technology that had already developed some good things. And that was the time when everything, well, not yet. Digitalization, but automation started. And I was there. I did my apprenticeship in the Swiss mountains, and I had to. Every week I had to go to a theory course, which was in the big city of Lausanne. And I still remember the managing director of the company where I did my apprenticeship always told me, Andy, when they talk about automation, when they talk about digitalization, don't listen to that. That's just a fad. It'll pass. You'd be better off going to the lake, going for a swim, or renting yourself a boat. It'll pass. I was 20 at the time. I had a great diploma as a secretary, but that job didn't exist anymore. And that was the moment for me when I already had to make the first change in my professional life. And then I worked at a publishing house.
I
Was also a very young father. I became a father at 23. And then I realized that what I had learned wasn't helping me at all to support a family and have a good life. So I started studying. And the next 10 years were an exciting time, juggling studies, work, and family.
all at once. Wow.
Back then, I had an incredible amount of energy, and I also learned a lot about myself during that time. I learned that I have ambition. I learned that I want to be the best. I learned that I have something to prove. And then I encountered the corporate world. I also had to learn languages. Yeah, that's when I learned German too.
And
I moved to the wild German-speaking part of Switzerland to learn German. And then I also realized that I'm actually not bad in sales, because back then, it was all about offering service for me. It was about understanding what people wanted and delivering exactly what they wanted. And that helped me. So from being a salesperson, I became head of sales. Then I was here, became a manager, and a few years later, I simply was the boss of an organization with 300 sales employees.
that was, of course, really impressive to be on the road again. And I honestly think that really comes out. I noticed it back then too, when we first met. This person knows how to do business and so on. He really, really knows it well. But I want to come back to the topic of languages. How important is that, especially since you've worked for global organizations? By the way, you're one of our certified profile values partners, and I do profiling from all corners of the world. Japan, Korea, or even the Congo. Yeah, the
Democratic Republic.
exactly. And you speak these 3 languages, I'd say, that are incredibly important. Of course, German, English, and French, and so on. I'm not sure about Spanish, but you probably speak that too, right? I
Intended to learn Polish 15 years ago.
It counts.
And that's where I found my limits. Either I was too old or the language was too complicated.
For me, it is difficult. I have a very, very good friend in Poland, in Krakow. He's a professor. He kept trying to teach me, but I failed at that too. I can say dziękuję for good evening or thank you or whatever, but that's about it. But all right, should we move away from language and get back to corporate? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so the company, bye. I grew up in Switzerland. It was a family business, 3rd generation.
And
The 3rd generation sold it. Sold to a company from Australia. And that suddenly opened up my horizons completely because I was also nominated as a talent. That means the company sent me all around the world. I could even go to university, study Mona Lisa in Melbourne, and so on. And that just gave me an incredible number of opportunities and made me really happy. Because I could prove that I was good, and it was a journey towards success. It was also a journey for money. Because I have to say, I remember, once I had a new boss. He comes into the garage with me and says, "Yeah, but Andy, your car, a senior executive at your level can't have such a small car." And I was supposed to buy myself a bigger car. And that's just how I learned it, and I benefited a lot from it. But without realizing that it was pointless.
good that you mention it, because today you think differently.
Today I think differently, but back then I just grew into it because it was fun, and I also thought, this is the most important thing in life. I have my 2 kids, they've grown up, and I didn't really get to know them. I was always in Hong Kong, or I was in Mexico, or I had meetings and things going on. And I missed out on a lot of things. And I only realized later that I didn't necessarily set the right priorities. But unfortunately, by then I was almost 50. And that's when I became self-employed. Becoming self-employed was about proving to myself that I could do things, not depending on others, but only on myself. And that I also need to pay more attention to what's important to me, the people around me. And that was a real challenge to my life philosophy. And then, just from one day to the next, I simply
Set.
off.
It's also fascinating when you look at it that way. If I say it again, you were basically, well, to put it bluntly, a serf, at least that's what you'd call it, of the company. You were on the clock around the clock, and that's why you didn't see your kids enough. But of course, you also have to, and I think you should appreciate this, see how much you were able to learn there and how much you were supported. But at a certain point in life, you have to, or maybe you don't have to, but you might realize, hang on, things can't just keep going like this forever. And then to ask yourself, how can I get to the point? What can I accomplish on my own? And that was the point. I think we met back then in St. Gallen, I think, during the certification. We met there. I don't remember exactly, around 2010 or so.
Or 2011.
Yeah, that's right.
No date yet.
Couldn't find one. And that's when you were right in the middle of figuring things out, saying, hey, and we had a good chat, even during the lunch break. And you said, yeah, so, I'm going to set this up myself now, and that brings me to the second main point we have. Your business model. So, what is it? On the one hand, what led you to do this? You explained it quite well. You wanted to be independent, to be able to rely on yourself, so to speak. But what was the model then, where you said, hey, I was a manager for many years, I moved this company forward, I made all sorts of things happen, but now I'm on my own. Yeah, I think that's something our listeners are interested in. Yeah, So how do I do that, and what do I base it on? So tell us a bit about how your first period as a self-employed person was.
Well, maybe because I rose very quickly into a high level. In the companies, I reached a point where my next goal was to become CEO. And that's where I was disappointed, because that's what the other side said, meaning the people who make the decisions. They always said, yeah, Andy has to sell, that's what he's good at. He needs to sell to people, push things, that's what he does well. But giving him the responsibility of running a business, that's not something we want, because he can't do that. And I wanted to prove it, but I couldn't. And then I probably had a bit of frustration, where I told myself, repeating the same thing somewhere else isn't going to make me any bigger. And people believe in me for certain things, but they don't believe in me for other things. And now I need to have a goal that motivates me to work. And then I said, Andy, just prove to yourself that you can change your life. Prove to yourself that you can simply make the right decisions that will eventually bring you exactly what you're looking for. And best of all, you can just start your very own successful business. And then I thought about what are the things I like to do, and what are the things I'm good at. And negotiations, that's always been a great topic for me. I've always loved negotiating. And I also had contacts in Australia from a company, Ian's International, that I had worked with. So I just contacted the owner and said, I'd like to be one of your crew, but I don't want to work for you. I want to have my own company. And he told me, it's simple, Give me money and I'll train you. And then I said yes. And when it comes to customers, that's your problem, folks. That's a problem. And I thought that was great because he passed on the knowledge to me about how to train people. Content-wise, I wasn't bad, and then I just had to go out and find customers.
So just to clarify, you paid for your training, but did you also pass it on to him when you used this training, this method, to train others? Did he benefit from that as well? Exactly.
Like a license. Back then, I paid money to have the right. And also for the trainings I did. And then I paid a licensing fee when I had clients. And that's how he made his living too. He lived off licenses. And so I suddenly found myself on the road. And yeah, in the first year I probably made more PowerPoint presentations and proposals than I actually won contracts. But then I just realized I developed my own marketing philosophy. And I didn't do it like in the books. I just said, marketing means you have to work a market, work where it's pink and where the money is. If it makes sense, then it's good. Don't waste time developing huge concepts that just keep people busy, only to make more offers or respond to more requests for proposals. With friends. So, I just learned from that, and I found it exciting because it slowly started to work. And then, when you get started, you always have people who tell other people how good it was. And that's how my sales developed. Is that how my sales evolved? And then I once had a client who was in England. And he said to me, Andy, I would really like a way to profile people, and the method has to be simple. I want to have a red light, yellow light, green light system. And I said to him, yeah, why are you looking for that? He said, yeah, it's just too complicated with people. And if I have a system, then it monitors, hire them or don't hire them. And I was shocked. I was shocked that human resources thinks like that. But still, I started looking. And suddenly there was a brand new company from Munich, Profiling Value, who also had that in their test. That wasn't the main point, but it was also in the test. And that's how I became interested in profiling value.
So that means, in a way, when we look at your business model, you're in the combination of helping people increase profitability, not just individuals, but entire organizations, by teaching them good methods, but also by holding up a mirror to them, to the individual people, and maybe, in some cases, telling them, this isn't a good fit, you're not in the right place here. So, in a way, personnel diagnostics, which is what we are, and negotiation methodology have actually found a nice union. Right.
I didn't find it right away because I came across you by chance. Then I tried to sell the methodology to this company, and that was just too complicated. Profiling buddies. And they didn't buy it. And then I fell in love with profiling values because it's a tool that helped me to develop myself. It helped me understand myself better, and it also gave me a vocabulary to talk about things like intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic. Then I also started to live with these 3 value dimensions. To live by them. And so, as a person, I think I grew, and that naturally became part of my business. But at the beginning, I didn't push for it. It was more selfish, to be honest.
But then it just sort of happened on its own. So I think that's what you're trying to say here as well. I think it had to grow within you, and it's nice how you put it. Yes. That it also, in a way, built up inside you. But then I remember, for example, a major international client with a Spanish representative who really jumped on board enthusiastically. We went to Dubai, as I already mentioned. We went there to provide training. But we also did other things together, and I have to say, quite openly and pleasantly. That was a ton of fun. You just call and say, Uli, don't you want to join in here? And I always had my consultant with me as well, alongside the system provider. And it was always not just very substantial, but also clear, fantastic, and great. So it was always a lot of fun, too.
And that's also part of the values I want to bring to doing business. And maybe that's also something I was looking for when I became self-employed. The companies wore me down because you want to do something, but you need to have a budget. You have internal procedures that have just gotten more and more complicated.
You.
Have so many incompetent people. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say that, but I'm saying it anyway. You have so many incompetent people who have responsibility. These people may have the position, but they're not mature enough to handle responsibility. And there's just such a heavy system in big companies. And then I told myself, if I'm self-employed, if my gut tells me, Andy, do it, then I just do it. I try not to overthink things. And that's just how I've always been. Working with Uli has always been fun for me. If you feel like Uli can help, just ask him. And when we do something, if it turns out well, that's great. If it doesn't go so well, okay, then we talk about what we could do better next time.
Yeah, which I always think is a really great thing, because you need that kind of feedback culture. I remember our flight to Dubai really well. It was about 7 hours, and we talked a lot. But also certain moments where together, we had workshops or events where afterwards we'd say, yeah, okay, what went well, what can we do better? And I think that's what unites us, in spirit, to say, yeah, sure, we have tools, that's true, but in the end, it's about what we bring together for the customer. Yeah.
The value creation, the value you bring. And that's something I've always liked as someone who's self-employed. That I don't necessarily have to have the contract, and the customer doesn't necessarily have to have me. And I always want to feel like I'm bringing something. That's my need for core recognition. And I also need to feel that I'm bringing something to the customer. And I've always had a pretty open, free relationship with the customer where I would say, if it doesn't work out, then we'll stop as well. If we have to do it with someone else because I can't manage it, then we'll bring someone else in. So, this freedom is something the customers really appreciate as well. They don't feel, how often have I told the customer, yes, you want to do a project with me for 2 years, but I don't want a contract. I just want an order confirmation for the next 3 months. After 3 months, if we feel like we can, that we're bringing value together to the organization, to the people, then we'll keep going. And people appreciate that, because that's not how it usually is in the organization.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot from you in that regard, especially in sales. I thought it was so great when I once asked you, so, what are your prices actually like, and how do you handle that? And you're on the higher end price-wise and so on. That's just how it is. We don't need to go into detail here, but then you once quoted, well, yeah, then the client asks me. And somehow it goes like this. Andy, or Mr. Marko, you're twice as expensive as the competition. And you just come back to them and say, yeah, but I'm 3 times as good. Yeah, so, yeah, how? So, yeah, what do you mean by that? Yeah, but don't you see that you're making a much better investment if you go with me and not the others? And I think that's also a bit of a point for a lot of service providers to show up with more confidence, not just say, yeah, I'm mainstream or whatever. If I dedicate myself and tailor my approach exactly to this client, if I have a huge wealth of experience like you do, great tools like you have, then this client, and I have to be honest here, we're always too cheap. We should always charge more. They get so much value that if they just buy something off the rack on the market, they might as well just burn their money. And you really made a point for me there. Since then, I think I've gotten a bit better at sales too.
That's good. And I mean, we can't afford to be arrogant. You always have to be careful about that. There is a limit. but I don't take myself seriously at all in what I do. I have a motto with the 3 H's: humility, humanity, and humor. And I just think, thank you very much. We're people working with other people. And once again, I'm really, really, really aligned with profiling value or the theory of values. So, I know systems are cool, but people matter more to me. And you have to try to live that way too. And in business, I probably have the luxury that things have always gone well for me, and no, it doesn't bother me if a client says, well, either you lower your prices or you don't get the contract. Then I say, go ahead, go to someone else, but don't mess with me now. My job isn't about giving discounts. My job is to bring value to you,
Yeah.
to have that feeling. If I don't bring enough value, then I wish you lots of success. Go find someone else. This relaxation, this distancing from the hustle is important too, because then I sleep very well at night.
Yeah, and above all, it's also that you're not at a bazaar, at the typical Arab one. You know, where you start with an astronomical price and then go down, but that's not the case here at all, so to speak. Adjustment of services. So my first lesson in sales was, never reduce the price without adjusting the services. Because otherwise the customer has to think, hang on a second, you actually wanted to rip me off before you wanted more money. Now you can do it for less, so that just can't be right. And I really like how you say humility, humor, and humanity. I've printed this out here, which is also important for you, and in our method, and you know this, you're deeply involved, humanity is the key element. That's what ultimately drives everything forward. And that actually brings me to our last important point, to also consider, hey, humanity also means giving back. As Hartman says, give yourself. After you say, know yourself, I know what I know. So, accept yourself as well. I accept myself as I am. Build yourself. I build myself up so I can become the best I can be. But that's where most people stop. And give yourself, also back to society. We're all standing on the shoulders of millions, billions of people who paved the way for us, so we could start where we did. And there are 2 things I'm interested in now, if you want to touch on them again. First, with Bluebird, where you're a mentor. With Anatoly Fichtner, I believe, whom I've also been in touch with before. And then you also do things in the art world. So if we're just talking about how we give back to society now, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's probably also an age-old thing. At a certain point in life, you've done things, you've proven yourself. And now, what's my reason for being here? And passing things on. For example, I mentioned earlier that I didn't have much time for my kids. And I've never had such a good relationship with my kids as I have since I became self-employed. And that's also giving to the kids. Giving doesn't mean telling them what to do, but rather just spending time together, making time, doing activities together. And I'm really motivated when people come to me and ask something of me, where I can say, now I help you because it does me good, so it's a bit like feeding the soul. Do you say that?
In German, yeah, I think feeding the soul is pretty good. But also your own, Andy. For example, you also go heliskiing, I heard, in Canada. Have you ever told us about it? And you also went with your son. That was probably one of those things where you'd say, yeah, it really strengthened your relationship, right?
It did, yeah. Even when I go on these heliskiing trips to take care of my son, I also go for my own enjoyment.
Of course.
But for example, those are things that do you good. So, you feel like you're doing something valuable. You're doing something that has meaning. And art, for example, is also something that feeds the soul because you're confronted with real human talent. You're faced with people who don't think the way we do. They have a different perspective on life. They have different lenses. They have different lenses through which they read things. And this abnormality, I've also worked with artists. And profiling values, they see the world differently. But the way they see the world is fascinating. And that also helps me to grow. And this interest in people, that's what drives me now. And of course I have to pay the bills and I still need to have lucrative projects, but I have many, and maybe more and more, activities that go in this direction, feeding my soul. Yeah.
You're doing that well. I've also heard that you've moved a bit higher up into the mountains for your own soul, so you can experience nature even more. Also, as a mentor, maybe you'd like to add something about that. Maybe say 2 or 3 things about how it is at Bluebird, how you got involved, and how you see it.
So, with Luca, now that the company exists, not anymore, why is that? Anatoly has now started a company. And, for example, a man I met at a client. That's always how it goes for me. I meet people at a place. And then special relationships develop. And we do something together, somewhere else. And that's not the result of strategies, but rather opportunities that are created through human relationships. And Anatoly, he wanted to get away from the corporate world. He's much younger than I am, and he wanted to start a company that's different in the coaching field. And that's how he started Bluebird. He started it, and I was his mentor. And that's an activity that's exciting, because basically, you don't have any real responsibility in the company. But you help the person ask themselves questions, and you help the person grow. And that's how I got a few mentoring mandates or assignments, and that was fun too, because again, it had to do with negotiations. How can I get the other person to make their own decisions? And I don't want to be the one who knows better than you. I don't want to be the one who has the solution. And for example, with profiling value, I also told a client, don't use it to decide whether you should keep someone in your organization or not.
That
isn't the point. That's not a qualification. It's not a minimum grade that you have to achieve. It's more of a tool that helps you understand the other person better and helps them understand themselves better.
Very, very well said, Andy. And I think that's always how I've seen you. By the way, I'd also say you've been a mentor to me more than once. You've got a bit more experience than I do, and you've been through different things. And in our collaboration, I've always found that to be really wonderful. You have this natural way of just adding something, of saying something, but not in a pushy way. That's just how I've experienced it. And at the same time, it connects in a way that the other person realizes, hey, maybe I can get something out of this. And that's a lovely talent, and I think, honestly, nothing can really top that. If I may say so.
If I may. Helping each other out, that means I see what I can learn from you, and you see what you can learn from me. For me, that's the best possible outcome. I benefit from the other person, and the other person benefits from me. That's how it works.
Yeah, and that reciprocity is really what being human is all about. We only really find ourselves through others, and that's what moves us forward, Andy. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. It was honestly really interesting and great to hear from you. Thank you very much for visiting us here.
And Ali, thanks as well for the opportunity. And it was fun to have a bit of a longer chat with you again.
Yeah, maybe we should take a look more often at how we spend our time. How we spend our time, I mean. So, maybe I'll come to the Swiss mountains. I'm already looking forward to it. So, dear Ollie, warm greetings to all our listeners. Thank you so much for sticking with us right to the end. Please give us your feedback. Let us know what you think on LinkedIn or on the podcast platforms. We always want to get better. I'm already looking forward to the next episodes. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
See you.